There are a lot of myths out there about how powerful Putin actually is. While he's seen as a sort of all-knowing, all-seeing evil villain in much of the Western media, if you talk to most people inside Russia, they think we're giving him too much credit. Nobody understands Putin's power better than the people in Russia who are working to hold the powerful to account. That's why I sat down with Russian investigative journalist Andrei Soldatov at PutinCon, a conference organized by the Human Rights Foundation that was all about understanding Putin's background and influence. Soldatov has been a journalist in Russia for about 20 years, with a special focus on covering Russian security services and their work. That's everything from spy poisonings to surveillance. And as a result of that, he's been investigated himself several times, had criminal cases opened against him, had offices that he's worked in searched, plus various other intimidation tactics to keep him from doing his work. And this is what he has to say about Putin and threats to the free press in Russia. What can you tell us about Putin's time in the KGB and then as head of the FSB and how that might have influenced, where he is today?
Well, the problem is that if you are trained in the KGB, that gives you a very special kind of mentality. First of all, you see the world in terms of threats. Every situation, every crisis, every development you see as a threat to you. That's why, for instance, the internet itself was seen by Putin and his friends, many of them with KGB background, as a threat to the society and to political stability. And of course, it's very bad for the development of the society because it means that Putin himself, he feels very uncomfortable when people share information freely and uncensored, and he wants to do something about it. But the problem is that these people are, by definition, very extremely suspicious. And that means a lot for journalists. As I said, I started my journalism back in 1996, probably. And back then I remember that you might at least ask some questions, and probably the answers would be bad. What changed is that now many Kremlin officials, if they ask some questions, they immediately fight back. They ask, who ordered you, who pay you to ask this question? Right. They believe that everybody are part of some big conspiracy. Right. And that makes the Russian government kind of fortress, completely impenetrable for outsiders. And that means that they are not very interested in journalism.
What is the difference between a state-sponsored killing, a state-directed and ordered killing, and something that certain agents may feel emboldened to do, but they may not have gotten direct orders from the Kremlin or Putin himself? Do you feel like there's an important distinction there? There tends to be this theory that Putin's behind every single thing that happens. Yeah, and of course it cannot be. Yeah. He's not Stalin. But the problem here is that many years ago, the Kremlin adopted a very efficient tactics and outsourcing. It's a great thing if you need to deny your responsibility. And you can use these things for doing many things, from cyber attacks to attacks on your journalists to actual assassinations. In the end of the day, it would mean that you cannot properly investigate this crime. And that happened to many investigations of high-profile assassinations in Russia. The problem here is that the Russian line is always to go only after people who actually made a killing. And then to stop and said, okay, fine, we found these guys, end of question. Yeah. The crime is solved. And it's not, because you need to find and to present a motive why these people who have nothing to do with Eva Nemtsov or Politkovsky decided to kill them. Right. And that's the moment, that's the line when every Russian investigation just stops. Right. That's why outsourcing is so important. It's a crucial element of this system. So what do you focus on in your journalism and your investigations in Russia? I've been writing about Russian security agencies and intelligence agencies since 1999, ranging from terrorist attacks to spy scandals to cyber. So having started in the 90s, you've actually seen how he's cracked down on the press increasingly. And he's shut down a number of outlets, banned certain journalists. Have you faced threats yourself from the security services or from other officials? Oh yes, well, I changed so many publications, probably 8. And to be honest now, it's extremely difficult to find a way to get published in Russia.
And when I started, I remember that almost every Moscow publication had an investigative department. These days, I think it was last year, we tried with my colleagues to count how many investigative journalists we have. And it was about probably 8, maybe 10.
So what are the specific challenges that you face when you try to do your work?
The usual thing is it's extremely difficult to get people talking to you. Because they are not interested, because they're afraid, because they do not see any sense at, say, talking to journalists or, to put it bluntly, leaking anything to journalists, because the system of governance is so opaque that you cannot hope to achieve any results, even if you, say, leak some information to the media. And the second thing is we have some interesting, to put it mildly, legislation about journalism, and actually you are very limited in what you can publish. For instance, if you write something about ISIS these days in Russia, you need to follow every mention of ISIS with a special line: this is an organization prohibited in Russia, which just destroys everything. I mean, in terms of narrative of the story, and it doesn't make any sense. And also, of course, people are afraid, including your publishers and your editors. Back in the 2000s, the Kremlin, well, they choose to attack journalists directly. And for instance, my very first criminal case opened against me by the FSB, the Russian Security Service, was in 2002. But then later on they developed the tactics, and now it's about how to force the editors to pacify journalists.
So you said your first criminal case. How many criminal cases have they opened against you?
Many. Nobody can be guaranteed because they constantly have been updating this legislation. Some years ago it was impossible to accuse a journalist of being a spy for a very legal reason, because journalists are not supposed to have access to state secrets. They do not have security clearance. But this legislation was changed, and now everybody, every expert actually, who say was in contact with some international organization, whatever it could be accused of being harmful for the Russian national security.
So given the increasing limits and criminal cases and threats that you faced, what's your motivation to keep going, keep doing this work?
Well, I started long ago. I mean, I started before Putin came to power. I still believe in my profession.
What Soldatov said at the end there is what a lot of journalists I've spoken to in Russia say, that despite the increasingly hostile environment to the free press in Russia, they believe in their work, and that's why they keep going. The best way that people can support them is to read and share that work. Soldatov is the co-founder and editor of a website where he and others report on security services in Russia as well as around the world. He's also the author of several books, and you can follow him on Twitter. One thing from the interview that I want to call out in particular was what he said about Putin seeing the internet as a threat. We did this interview in 2018, and there are now signs that the Russian government is moving to try and cut itself off from the World Wide Web, meaning that they would try to have their own in-country internet and potentially cut off access for the rest of the web for users inside Russia. It won't be easy for them. It does sound scary, and it's a complicated move, but the Russian legislature is considering draft legislation that would mean they could try. This is hugely important for Russians' information access going forward, and it's something that journalists like Soldatov are keeping a close eye on, and we will too. Thanks for watching the Russia Desk.